Welcome to Got Grass, conversations with the legends and leaders of Bluegrass. You've enjoyed live Bluegrass at Guitar Town CT concerts in Hampton, Connecticut since 2008. From Tony Rice, Rouse Stanley, and Doyle Lawson to Tim O'Brien, Sierra Hall, and Billy Strings. Now you can go behind the scenes as we chat with your favorite Bluegrass stars. I'm your podcast host, Chris Worth. Okay, I'm very happy to welcome Pete Wernick to Got Grass. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Chris. Good to be here with you.
I usually start this off with what I consider a simple question, but sometimes people get baffled by it. And the question is, what's a perfect day off for you without your banjo in sight?
Oh, gosh. Well, I live in a really beautiful place. I live outside of Boulder, Colorado, and right from my front porch, I have a mountain view with beautiful clouds and big trees, and it's just idyllic. My wife and I like sitting out there and just saying, aren't we fortunate? And we are, no doubt about it. And a typical day, I like doing yard work. We have 2.5 acres, and I take care of it, and then I do practicing at a little cabin down right by the creek that crosses my property, and that's an idyllic little spot with no electricity. And last night I just practiced in the dark. The moon was out, and I don't need to see my banjo to practice, so that's a nice part of a day. And then most of every day, literally the majority of the time, I'm usually working on the Wernick Method, which is my teaching network. I have about 100 teachers who teach jamming in my style, according to training materials I put together. And I do a lot of consultation with all the teachers and certify new ones. And I'm always in touch with Leslie Dare, who is my office manager, and she's always working to make everything more efficient. And we just redid our orientation and materials for students. And so at the age of 79, I'm not retired. I'm chugging along and enjoying it, really, because I know I'm doing some good for some people.
I know one of your teachers very well, Austin Scelzo, who's a Connecticut guy.
Great.
Yeah, he's really taken the bull by the horns in Bluegrass, and he's quite something.
What a great story he has, where I met him when he was 25, and he was working full-time as a middle school orchestra and band music teacher. And I noticed what a good musician he was, and we started talking about the Wernick Method, and it's a good way for people to get started. And he, I don't know, I just could tell that he was going to take a good bite out of that. And it wasn't long before he called me and said, I'm thinking I'm quitting my job and becoming full-time in Bluegrass. And I said, well, I did that when I was not much different from your age, and I had a head start. I wrote, some successful books that were floating me with royalties, but I just left my job at Cornell. I was a research associate. I had a doctorate and I was working, but I was also doing music on the side, and it was getting prosperous in different ways. And so I took the leap, moved to Colorado when I was 30, and left academia behind. And I'm glad I did. It worked out well for me, and I've lived a fortunate life.
Could you, I don't know if you can summarize the Wernick Method for those listeners who probably have heard of it but not sure what it is. I'm not trying to give away your secrets, but could you just kind of summarize the approach that you take with that?
Yeah, the fact is that if you're a teacher and you want your student to learn, the key is motivation. There's all these teachers who have students show up and say, oh, I didn't have time to practice. That is common, because closet playing is not that much fun and people don't sustain it very well. And when you take lessons or you just learn stuff online and you're sitting there by yourself, the fire burns low pretty soon, and then you find other things you'd rather do. But we get people together to actually play bluegrass music with each other. And that's something that's hard to do when you're a beginner, to find people to play with, but we find them and we all put them all together, and they get motivated because they want to be good for each other. They don't want to be embarrassed in front of each other, so they practice. And we started off real easy with just 4 chords. You only have to know G, C, D, and A. And bluegrass is so wonderful that way. With 4 chords, you can play 3-chord songs in either of 2 keys. So males and females are not boxed out by the wrong key being chosen, which happens a lot to females who think everybody has to play in G, but they don't, because that's not a good singing key usually for women. Anyway, and then we coach them. We just teach them all the protocols. We teach them how to jam, and by the end of the first day, they've spent a lot of time jamming, and by the time that they finish the class, they actually know they know how, and they have some confidence, and then they can get together with people at a festival or the same people they met at the class. And so we've had a total enrollment now of 15,000 people, and they're all over the place. We've had classes in every state except Hawaii and a couple of others, and overseas. We even have interest in China and Japan and a bunch of places in Europe. So this is, it's burgeoning. And if you have to say it in one word, you say, learn to jam first. That's the point. Some people think you have to learn scales and how to hold the pick and a million things like that. And it takes forever to actually, and then you learn pieces. You learn to memorize pieces, which is the way classical music is taught. And it's not a good way to learn bluegrass. You should learn to play rhythm on a bunch of 3-chord songs and just play along and learn how to follow chord changes, not looking at a book, but looking at the left hand of the guitar, which is the way all people do it once they know how to jam. But beginners, how would they know? So we just tell them everything. And then and we have a really great retention rate of people continuing to play bluegrass and not stopping practicing, because it's not boring anymore to practice. It's like, I better be good next Saturday because I'm jamming with people, you know. And that's how I learned. When I was 14, I had friends who showed me how to follow guitar chords, and then I was playing banjo almost immediately. Not Scruggs style, that took a while, but I was playing folk music with my friends. In fact, the same friends that I knew in the 60s, we're still in touch with each other, and I'm soon to go to our 33rd annual reunion, and we'll play some of those same songs that we played when we were teenagers, and now we're in our 70s, you know.
Oh, would that be like Tony, Trischka, Andy Statman, those guys?
No, I didn't know them until later. These are people I grew up with in the Bronx, and I moved to Manhattan for college, and then I knew Andy in Manhattan, and I met Tony once I moved up to Ithaca to be at Cornell, and the first version of Country Cooking had Tony in it, and Russ Barenberg and me and my wife Joan, then known as Nandi. She's the same person, but she kind of changed names in the middle someplace. Anyway, but I grew up in New York, and I was living in there until I was 24, and then moved to Ithaca, came to Colorado when I was 30. And then I met some people that that really helped change my life, because it turned into Hot Rize.
I was just going to go back a little bit to your upbringing, because a lot of the players I talked to on this podcast say that they didn't really choose bluegrass. It kind of chose them. They just were in it from the time they were born, either in a family band. They were sometimes performing at age 6 with their band and touring. Your background is a little bit different, being from New York City.
Yes,
And so do you feel like bluegrass chose you in a way? In the same way?
I mean, it wasn't so much bluegrass. Earl Scruggs' banjo just knocked my socks off. I know this over the years. I talk with a lot of banjo players, and many banjo players remember the moment they first heard Earl Scruggs. Just like, you know, there's certain disasters that people remember where they were when they heard about it. this isn't a disaster, but my friend just played me a record, and the first thing he played was Shuckin' the Corn by Scruggs, and it was unbelievable to me. It was like, I don't know, couldn't believe it. And I said, that's one guy playing all those notes, and it was about 11 notes a second he was playing. And it was so beautiful. And so once I started playing with my friends, and I was playing like kind of Pete Seeger style banjo with them, but I remembered Scruggs, so my sister gave me a couple of Flatt and Scruggs records for my 15th birthday, but before that, I actually got to see Flatt and Scruggs. They came to New York. This was before the Carnegie Hall concert, although I went to that, but that was my third time seeing them, because they would come to New York, and I get to see Scruggs. He's in his 30s, and that pulled me in, and I wasn't that interested in anything but the banjo at first. Really, that was all. And I've noticed that a fair number of people, that's also the case. The banjo brings them in, and then they get used to the other stuff. The wear on my LP records was always on the banjo instrumentals. And then I got lazy, and I thought, well, that Roll in My Sweet Baby's Arms, that's good. And then I heard Someday We'll Meet Again, Sweetheart, and I thought, man, that's a beautiful song. That's a sad song. And Earl's banjo playing is like sad on that cut. And I started and then the Stanley Brothers and the stuff they sang, and it just seeped into my consciousness. And I think it was the singing and just the Southern sound. I always liked Southern talking and Southern singing. I was into country music, and I used to like Webb Pierce when I was 9 years old. And I don't know, it just started growing on me. And so I bought the records. I was still a teenager when I got a radio show of bluegrass in my college. And that opened the door to getting a whole bunch of records. So I got all these records, and I listened to them, and when I was 19, I attended the first Bluegrass Festival in Fincastle in 1965. And that kind of sealed the deal, because there they were, the legends, right in front of me. I got to see Jimmy Martin, got to see the Stanley Brothers, got to interview Jimmy Martin, got to interview the Stanley Brothers for my radio show. And Mac Wiseman and Don Reno, who is a big hero of mine. And they were all very nice to me. And I got to see the very famous Bluegrass Story, where everybody gets up with Monroe, and Benny Martin's up there, and Mac Wiseman singing Traveling This Lonesome Road with Bill. And they're talking about the old days, which at that point was less than 20 years ago. And I thought, oh man, I missed so much stuff. But there I was at the first Bluegrass Festival, and I went to other Carlton Haney festivals, and Tex Logan, who lived near me and was a listener on my program, invited me to these parties that he would have when Bill Monroe came into town. So I'd be there at this party where people are just playing music informally, and like one of them's Bill Monroe, and Peter Rowan would be there, and all kinds of great musicians from New York. Jody Stecker would be there. And I still remember, basically, it was the first time I stayed up till dawn for any reason other than studying for an exam, because the music was just going. And I still can picture in my mind Hazel Dickens and Bill Monroe dancing together as the sun was coming up. And these are things that just meant so much more to me than what I was reading in the sociology books. I mean, I really wanted to be a sociologist because I thought I could help the society improve itself. And over years of experience in that field, I found out that the sociology as practiced by the academics I was around was mostly inward turned, and it was about getting journal articles written, and it wasn't about, they had money from the Great Society, but they were not, none of the studies had any effect on anything, except that they supported sociologists for a period of time. And so I wasn't as enthused by that time. and then country cooking started making records, and I wrote these instruction books that were doing very well, and the bluegrass was beckoning to me. So it was sort of it wasn't like it suddenly grabbed me and threw me in, or I wasn't in any family band, that was for sure. My dad played some harmonica, and my friends in the Bronx played music, but none of them became, professional doing that. They were good, but, so, and I'm such an unlikely person, I'm from an academic family. All four of my grandparents were Jews who fled Russia in around 1900. If somebody said, well, someday your grandson is going to be a major member of the bluegrass community, they'd say, of course, what's that? And so on and so forth. But I feel very at home in the bluegrass community, very accepted, even though I'm an odd pigeon from not the usual place, but.
So were you kind of destined, at least by your family in some way, to be an academic, and then bluegrass
Yes.
kind of said, this is not, I really want to be in music, not academia?
Yeah, that you just put it in a nutshell right there.
Mm-hmm. So at one point you decided just to randomly go to Colorado, or did you have some connection there?
Well, the story is, we had country cooking going, and that was fun, and we had a lot of nice friends in Ithaca. On a nice day in Ithaca, it's about as beautiful as you could ask for, but nice days in Ithaca are relatively rare. Now, my wife, she was with me back east, of course, and we got married in Ithaca, and then we started thinking, are we going to live in Ithaca our whole life? Because it rains a lot and it snows on into May, and it starts snowing in September and October. He said, no, I don't want to live here my whole life. Where should we go that will live for the rest of our lives? And Joan is from Colorado. So could you hold on a second?
Sure.
Just stop it. Could you not? Sorry. Where were we?
Moving to Colorado, your wife.
Yeah. And so we had gone out to Colorado to visit her family, and I couldn't believe how nice it was in the winter. And the low humidity in the summer was like, wow, that was amazing. And the only thing I was concerned about is there a music scene there I could be part of? So we booked our band out in Colorado for the third annual Rocky Mountain Bluegrass Festival and some other gigs, and got to check around Colorado, and I thought, yeah, this is the place, especially when I found the Denver Folklore Center, which was going strong at the time, and it was practically a supermarket for folk music with, selling instruments and records and books and bead shop and giving lessons and a concert hall. So that was that. I figured, okay, this is the place. And in 1976, on my 30th birthday, we moved to Denver, and then I found this lovely place outside of Boulder that we still live in 49 years later, and then I made it my business to find musicians, and that was not hard around the Folklore Center. Tim O'Brien was in town, and Charles Sawtelle worked at the Folklore Center. In fact, everybody who ended up in Hot Rize had some job or another at the Folklore Center. And Charles and I put together a band that was very informal, but played every Tuesday night. We were so informal that we changed the name of the band every week. It was usually either the Rambling Drifters or the Drifting Ramblers. And we had a lot of fun, and different people would sit in, including Tim and Nick Forster. And so my intention was to make a solo album, and I did get to do that on Flying Fish, and I asked Tim to be the singer on the album, and that was the first time he had been asked to do much lead singing. He was in a great band called the Ophelia Swing Band. That was an acoustic swing band, but he was only singing one song a night, and he was, he didn't seem like anybody fancied him as especially a singer. He was a fine player on fiddle and mandolin, but Well, when I heard him sing, I thought this is an exceptional singer, and so I asked him to sing on my record, and um, then he got asked to do a record. It was going to be an all fiddle record because he had won fiddle contests, and I said, "Man, you should do some singing on the record." So he did, and both Charles and I played on his record, and Charles and Tim played on my record. So when with the two records coming out, we hatched the idea of starting a band, and that's the beginning of Hot Rize. I organized it in '77, and we played the first gig in January '78.
Listening to your first solo album on YouTube, and I heard the singing, and I said, "Oh my!" I was almost hard to recognize Tim O'Brien. He was so young, but you could
Yeah,
get
he
that
was 22
voice.
at the time.
The voice came through, but it was really, it took me a while to say that is Tim, but it was pretty
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, and he matured in all kinds of ways as a musician. Although I wanted Andy Statman on the record because Andy and I had jammed during the making of Country Cooking Records, and I knew him from New York, and he had this incredible flowing, energetic rhythm style on the mandolin, and I wanted him on the record. And I was telling Tim how I'd want Andy on the record because of that, and he said, "Well, can you describe what he does on rhythm?" And I described it, and then Tim right away started doing it. I went, "Oh, this is too good for words," because it kind of lifts up the banjo and it kind of propels the banjo. It's sort of like riding a big wave, and you just feel propelled. And so we started getting together with just the bass player from the Ophelia Swing Band named Dwayne Webster, and Tim started calling it the Niwot Power Trio. And Niwot is where my house is. It's a town near Boulder. And we started calling it Niwot music, and it only had bass and mandolin, and I was using a phase shifter sometimes on my banjo for an extended kind of warbly sound that I liked. And we made this demo. We had Mike Scap, who was a local player, who was an incredible guitar player. He was on the demo. He didn't get to be on the record because he was reluctant to fly, so he stayed out in New Jersey, where he had moved after making this demo with me in Colorado. And that was actually with Charles on bass. That was the start of Hot Rize. But Mike was I don't know, he had various issues, you might say, including he didn't like riding in a car. So that doesn't make a very good road musician. And he quit after a few months, and we got Nick, and that was the band that stuck together for actually 20 years, 12 years of them full-time. And couldn't have been more fortunate to have that combination of people to launch my performing career with. I had done performing with Country Cooking in Ithaca, but this was full-time, and Eye on the Prize, which was full-time work as a musician, and we all wanted that, and we got it.
Yeah. What do you think it was? Because Hot Rize was a very unique sounding band and still is. What is it about? What makes that sound so good and so long lasting and so sparse but driving? It's I don't know how to describe it. It's a very special sound that no other band had or has.
Yeah. Well, everybody has their own handwriting, right? I mean, you can even be identified by your handwriting, even though you're all trying to do the same words. There's a difference. So everybody has their signature way they play their instrument. And Tim has this strong rhythm. He's just, somebody heard him and said he's rhythmically self-sufficient, which is his rhythm is enough to drive the whole band. And that's the way I heard it, although Charles on guitar did plenty and Nick on bass did plenty. But one of the things was we're only a four-piece. So, and then our lead singer is playing chopping mandolin. That leaves a lot of space. Charles was not a very busy background guitar player. He would choose his moments and be strong, but his strum was actually relatively quiet. So there's a lot of air in the sound, and then I could fill as I chose. And I wasn't that busy a banjo player behind everything. And in the 70s, there was a real tendency to get very experimental and out there and weird stuff or whatever. And we eschewed that, you might say, and put all the energy into groove instead of into explorations. And we actually were really comfortable with old songs. And when we started writing, they mostly sounded like old songs. And that distinguished us from other people because they were putting in extra chords everywhere they could. And we were doing 2-chord songs, 3-chord songs. And when you have a lead singer like Tim, you don't have to do much. I have an expression that I came up with after hearing George Jones, a whole record where there's hardly any accompaniment, just like a quiet chorus and a piano and a bass, And my expression was, if it's good enough, it doesn't need a lot of other stuff. And like I say, if you have a really good carrot, you can just eat the carrot. You don't need to make a flambe souffle, just there. It's a carrot or a good apple. And so we get out on stage, and instead of playing something real fast or anything like that, we do Blue Night in B with Tim singing. And he goes, Blue Night. And you already know he's a good singer just from the first 2 notes. And the first thing we want to do is we want to make a groove. And if you listen to any recordings of us starting a set, it's almost an explosion on the first downbeat, and that's the way we liked it. And that was the whole idea, is get the groove. And then now on the first song of the evening, you're kind of nervous, so maybe it speeds up a little bit, but it's still that. And Charles, when he puts in a guitar run, it's you really hear it. And we're all trying to serve the song. We're all trying to serve the singer, which is what any good band does. But, like I said, we had our signature way of sounding, just the voices and the instruments, even though we're all playing pretty standard bluegrass instruments.
Right.
Anyway, it's nice to have a recognizable sound, but we didn't decide to do that. We decided a bunch of things, but the sound just came out just because it was us.
Yeah. So you had Nick was playing electric bass all the time, right? Never played acoustic bass with you, or did
No,
he?
when Mike Scap quit the band after 3 or so months, we had gigs coming up, and we needed somebody fast. And Nick was a really good guitar player, and we knew he could do it. So we said, "Hey, Nick, we've got to play some gigs in Wyoming, and we're going to go play this new radio show called Prairie Home Companion out there in Minneapolis, and can you play with us?" And he said, "Okay, but I don't have a bass." And Charles said, "Don't worry, we'll get you a bass. We have a bass." And Nick learned how to play bass during a 5-day engagement we did up in Wyoming with almost nobody there at this club in Jackson Hole, Wyoming in May. It's a great ski area, but not in May. So nobody was there except these women in the group called Take Off Pounds Sensibly. And so we had quite a nice, relatively unimpeded set of gigs. And by the time we played on Prairie Home Companion and we played a festival in Minnesota in that May, we started sounding like a band, and we were always together, traveling together, doing everything together. We had a Cadillac, a 1969 Cadillac, so we would cross the country, just the 4 of us in a Cadillac, and had lots of mixtapes of our favorite music, which included a lot of great bluegrass, but also blues. Like the guys would be into Freddie King, and I remember first time I heard Stevie Ray Vaughan was on one of these mixtapes, and so we were kind of eclectic in what we liked, but we'd listen to Flatt and Scruggs and Stanley Brothers and talk about what we were hearing, and none of us had ever played in one of those iconic bands. Like, many bands have somebody who's a veteran of one of the important bands. And I had played some with Vernon Ray out in California, but the education we got was mostly just listening to these recordings. Driving across the country, that's 3 days of no place to go except nice Cadillac, air conditioning, leather seats, and good stereo. Charles made sure we had a good stereo, and we also had to listen to a lot of our own stuff because Charles said, "Got to listen to how we sounded last night," which we already knew how we sounded, and we didn't especially like that, but it gave us a chance to critique how the show was going, and it helped us improve the show because we could hear when there was dead air. We can hear when the joke was funny or when it wasn't. And we could sure hear whether the balance at the microphone, since we were all singing trios into one mic, we got that figured out so it would come out balanced right. And we could balance ourselves completely all right without any help from a sound person, which helped a lot, as long as the sound person just let us play and didn't try to mix us, Later, to really get it right, we actually started bringing along our friend Frank Edmondson, who was also from the Folklore Center. And at first he was just like a roadie, but then Charles trained him how to be a sound man over a period of years, and he became our sound man and got to be one of the best in bluegrass. And after we split up, he worked for Alison Krauss and Lyle Lovett. And, so we had the whole thing about Hot Rize was that we knew full well this was our chance to become well known and make a living, maybe. And we just did everything we knew how to do. We got a bus, we got a really good sound system that we bought it from Charles, who had owned a professional sound company. And just the ethic of the band was just, if there's anything we can do to make this work, let's do it. And we talked a lot about it as we drove, and it took a couple of years before we even got to make our first record, but that record really was a springboard for us.
Yeah.
And
I think of your band. By the way, you did play here at Guitar Town back in 2013. With Hot Rize and Red Knuckles. You probably don't remember. You played at a Unitarian church, big semi-round building. Anyway, I think of your band, Hot Rize, and I think of a lot of unique things about it. One was Charles Sawtelle's guitar playing, which was somebody once, maybe it was Tim or someone said, he took a solo and you never knew where it was going to end up, but he always ended up back in the right place. Like
that's true.
That was funny.
Well, Charles was willing to take risks,
Yeah.
And that was an interesting thing about him. He had some very worked out breaks, but he had this. His biggest thing was tone. He was very particular about instruments, and he didn't like playing any guitar except a Martin made in 1937. So he had a herringbone D28, and if you listen to any break he takes, there's a guitar tone on every single note. And he also just had his own way of phrasing things. And one time he said, "Oh, look, here's a Tony Rice lick," and he played it for us. We said, "Charles, that's not a Tony Rice lick. That's a Charles Sawtelle lick." He just, if you hummed him a melody, he'd hum you back a slightly different melody. He was just that way. And so he had an individualistic style, and that was good because everybody was copying Tony Rice, and we liked calling him the anti-Rice. And not that we didn't all admire Tony, of course we did, but we were kind of proud that we had somebody who wasn't just imitating Tony. And his rhythm style was also very spare, but he really knew when to punch it. And so his uniqueness was appreciated, especially. It would be really something. We'd be in front of a lot of people and we'd hear him wander off into sort of like, I wonder what he's going to do now. And he'd always get applause for his solo, which made me jealous. And I said, "You always get applause for your solo?" He says, "Yeah, well, I don't know. I just I'm like the baton twirler throws up the baton and hopes he catches it." And the audience would hear him sometimes, stumble a little bit, but they understood what he was doing, which is that he was creating something right then for them. And I had all these worked out breaks that I had carefully composed and then learned how to play verbatim. And by a few years into the band, I realized anybody who's heard us 5 times has heard the same exact break every time. But with Charles, you never knew what he was going to do, and that's more entertaining. Spontaneity has its own way of being entertaining. And so, that influenced me. I started getting a little more willing to take risks. But I'll tell you, what instrument do you play, Chris?
I play guitar, but I've been playing mandolin. I teach some bluegrass courses at a music school, and I had 3 classes and no mandolin player in 2 of them, so I had to take off. So I'm playing mandolin now more than anything else, but I appreciate that.
As a banjo player, I mean, I wondered if maybe you were a banjo player. See,
nope.
If you're a banjo player, there's one style that you're supposed to really know cold, and it's Scruggs style. And J.D. Crowe plays an awful lot like Earl Scruggs. And J.D. Crowe was active and busy on the circuit at the same time we were. So that meant he was on first and then we were on next, or we're on first, then he's on next. And that spooked me no end. I thought, you're not going to hear any mistakes the whole set when J.D. Crowe is playing. And I don't want to make a mistake either. I don't want to be the one guy in a space of 2 hours who makes a mistake on the banjo. And that's why I would compose these exact breaks and then practice them. So even if I was nervous, I had what I call it bulletproofing something, when you have it so far down in muscle memory that even if you're nervous and you're distracted, your hands do it for you. I had figured that out when I was trying to, be in banjo contests a lot. I'd get very nervous, and then I figured out if I really over practice something, it becomes a little more boring to play it, but it's exciting when it comes out sounding good. And then you're relieved that it came out and it's right. So I like listening to these old YouTubes, and my breaks, I know exactly what I'm going to hear, but I do it. And I'm pretty proud of that I figured that out, because when I jam, anything might happen, including I might make mistakes. And when I'm jamming, I don't care if I make mistakes. I'm just doing what I can. It's like saying in a conversation. But on stage in front of a lot of people, when Earl Scruggs is the standard, and he was still active playing at the time too, I just was too chicken to make a mistake. I didn't want to.
Yeah. I remember Tony Rice played here a few times, 4 times, I think, over the years. And I remember him saying, you really have to, you don't have to, but I like to, he would say, go out there on a limb. And sometimes I screw up, and people might not even notice that he screwed up, because even if his screw ups would be like amazing. But he had that attitude. I think that it's a different attitude that you can kind of just go out there and trust yourself. Even though some of his stuff was repetitive, and he would play certain, stock starts to breaks, then he would go off into the stratosphere sometimes. That's interesting how people approach it.
I think it's fair to, spontaneity in a show is always good. The MC shouldn't always say everything the same way.
Mm-hmm.
The lead singer should feel free to embellish the song differently each time. The harmony needs to be set and strong, and not much room for embellishment there. But if you're present, like Be Here Now, the audience can tell the difference whether you're phoning it in and you have it right, or, like you're on your toes and you're striving to please them at that moment. And that became part of our show. Especially the Red Knuckles part of the show, that there was a lot of spontaneous stuff in that. And that was almost the rule, is we're not going to let them just do the same thing every time. There's always some things you rely on that are going to work. And then the rest of the time, it frees you up, and it kind of gives you a different attitude if you say, I'm going to see what I can come up with here. Now, in the first few years of Hot Rize, and I was the guy who booked the band, I had this other style of paranoia, which is, if we screw up too much, we're not going to get booked next year, and we need this. We want to come every year to this festival. And we managed to get a string of dates. We played Winterhawk, which later became Gray Fox, every year. We played the Colorado Festival every year. We played Denton, North Carolina, which was Doyle Lawson's festival. We did that every year, and a number of things like that. But until we really established that, I was worried that I better not screw up, because I don't want this to be a band that's known for not being so good,
Yeah.
And I don't know. We just kept riding it, and I mean, to be a successful bluegrass band in the 1980s, before IBMA started, there was no showcasing any place back then. You just had to hit every club you could and hopefully get festival gigs where people would see you. And part of being a good band at a festival, and back in those days, they'd sometimes hire you for the whole weekend or 2 days instead of just coming and then leave to another festival. So we would hang around and we set up a table and talk to everybody. And they liked, the fans liked that. They could get to know us, and, we might get to sell one of our Martha White t-shirts or something, or just talk to people. And the promoters started realizing that Hot Rize was more than just a bunch of guys who hit the stage and then went back to the bus. And that was also part of everything. And well, the way we dressed, we even had a code sort of about the way we dressed when we weren't on stage. We wanted to look a little special, so we would always wear boots and good pants and not just jeans and so on. After a while, once we're established, then we could sort of do things more however we wanted. But having a look was important to us, and we kind of just stumbled on all wearing suits. Charles was always, anytime we'd pass a Goodwill, he'd say, "Oh, let's go in," and then he'd say, "That suit, that would fit you, and it's $3. Get it." So we all ended up with these suits. And one day we all wore them on stage, and we said, "Oh, look at that!" And people said, "You guys look good in suits." So suddenly we were the only band, except for Bill Monroe and the Stanley Brothers, and Ralph Stanley's band, and hardly anybody was wearing suits back then. They were into the country Gazette style of jeans and t-shirts and sneakers.
Sure.
And Newgrass Revival was not exactly fashion plates, although, of course, Sam always had a interesting jersey of some kind, plugging the Cardinals or something. But we having a look was important. In fact, our Cadillac was Sedan DeVille, had a white top and black. It was pretty sharp looking. And when we had to carry our sound system around, we got a U-Haul trailer, and the guys painted it black and white to match the Cadillac. So we had a rig that had a look. And
yeah, it's funny. I mean, I'm thinking back. It certainly worked for the Beatles, the suits, but a lot of bands, as you say.
But after a while, they abandoned them.
Well, they did after a while. Yeah, after a while, they got out of the straitjacket. But the appearance of a band, to me, is important as a fan. And I think bands have gotten away from, a lot of them, A, looking good, and B, talking to the audience very much. A lot of the younger bands especially seem like they don't have that MC, even the stale jokes are entertaining and part of connecting. And I think a lot of the younger bands, in my opinion, the ones I've seen, some that have played here, they play great, but then they just finish a song and turn their backs and play another song. I never liked that.
We studied that whole business of Charles. I remember him saying, we always sat in the same seats in the Cadillac. He'd be in the shotgun seat in the front, and I'd be behind him. Still remember him saying, "Guys, we're in the same business as Sammy Davis Jr.," which I don't think anybody else in the bluegrass world would have said that, but Charles had that vision, sort of. And that meant, and I tell people, all right, you're a musician, but if you're in business, you're in the entertainment business. It's the same business that the New York Yankees are in. And it's the same business as roller derby is in, and it's the same business as the Kardashians are in. So you got to be interesting and not just, the guy in the family will be happy to just hear the music and study the mandolin playing or whatever. But the guy only gets to go to the festival one day unless the whole family wants to go. And the whole family, the women they like to see the guy in the suit who has a nice way of talking. So Nick had fans just for his MC work. Red Knuckles had fans that the little kids would sometimes dress up like Red Knuckles and sit in the front. So we were trying to give everybody a reason to want to see our band, and then they would come for the whole festival. And that really meant something to the promoters, of course. Instead of getting dad for one day, they get the whole family for 3 days. Yeah. And, that was not exactly calculated that way, but we knew we wanted to be popular with everybody and not just the traditional bluegrassers and not just the progressive bluegrassers. We kind of had something in the show we hoped that would tickle everybody. And we weren't just, even our suits were different because they didn't match. And we had these ties. The ties were from the Goodwills because when we started the band, wide ties were completely out. So we would go into the Goodwills and there'd be a barrel of silk ties for 50 cents each. And we'd just help ourselves and, and I bought a tuxedo for $10, and then when I became IBMA president, that's what I wore time and again at the awards show and all. So that whole component, the retro component and the just it being, just style.
Yeah.
Style is a big thing. Everybody should, if you're going to be in the business, you need to be recognizable in as many ways as you can and unique if possible. So John Hartford was a mentor to me, and he said, style is built on limitations. So yeah, we weren't capable of playing jazz, a la bluegrass. So we left that alone. That was our limitation. So we say, all right, let's play 2-chord songs. Nobody's doing that many 2-chord songs. Yeah. And, that was part of what made Hot Rize unique. And then also just we were determined. We wouldn't stop. We just kept trying to, write songs and perfect our sound,
So was Red Knuckles always the alter ego of Hot Rize, or did that come later? Or how did that happen?
That's a whole story to itself, but the beginning was before the band even started. Tim told me, we're most of these gigs are going to be 4 sets a night that we're going to be playing, and let's not always have to play bluegrass the whole time. And why don't you get a dobro? He said. So I said, yeah, that's sensible. But when I went back to the Folklore Center to see if they had a dobro, they had a $50 lap steel with 6 strings. And I said, all right, I'll tune it like a dobro. I'll learn to play dobro on the lap steel. But when Nick joined the band and he could really play electric guitar, like really good. So we would have a time in every show where we'd say, all right, we're going to switch instruments and we'll play some kind of Western swing music. And as bands do, we started giving each other nicknames, and that's what I tell bands. I say, whatever gets you guys laughing when you're traveling together, if there's any way you can share that with the audience, do it. So I gave Nick the name Wendell Mercantile. I just said, you're Wendell Mercantile, because he was a sort of gangly, nerdy guy back then, and he was really into thinking of things to sell at our concession stand. And Tim said, I'm Red Knuckles, because, there was a time where if you had red hair, your name became Red. That's no longer true. There's nobody named Red anything, but there used to be Red Sovine, Red Smiley, Red everybody. Red Knuckles fit right into that. And so we all got nicknames, and then we'd start announcing when we played this music, we'd introduce ourselves by those names, but we didn't change clothes or anything. So 1980 Telluride video that I have there, I'm described as Waldo Otto, but I'm sitting there playing lap steel in my suit, my Hot Rize suit. But Charles had the idea that we'd go off stage and Red Knuckles would come back on stage wearing different clothes. And we got into the thing that they're them and we're us. Don't confuse the two. They're another band. And at first that was just a silly joke because people could tell, why are they wearing the same boots and pants? You know? But when we started playing bigger venues, people couldn't tell. So we find out that people argue about whether it was the same bunch of guys or really a different band. And some people simply believed it was a different band, so fine. And somebody even came up to the record table once and said, if you don't like them, why do you have them on part of the show? And I said, well, they're cheap, you know, and we need something to rest during our set, so we have them come on. And a journalist one time came on the bus and said, oh, now that I've interviewed you, can I interview Red Knuckles? And I said, no, you don't want to interview them. He says, why not? He says, it's just not going to be a good interview, you know. Really, just a short interview? No, you know. And then the journalist would leave the bus thinking we're jerks. And we liked that because we knew he'd find out later, and then he'd maybe give us some credit for having pulled his chain, you know. Yeah. And that became a signature part of Red Knuckles, the fact that the two bands would be snippy with each other as one band was leaving the stage, or two guys are leaving the stage and two guys from the other band are coming on. They'd have words and grumble with each other, and you know. These are things that just develop over a period of time just because you're trying to amuse yourself.
Yeah. Are you a natural comedian? Because I always felt of the Red Knuckles four, you probably said the least, but were the funniest. I don't know.
Well,
I just thought you had this comic timing was just like
Slade was
impeccable.
The one who said the least.
Well,
He'd
yeah, but
get up to the microphone, and he would stand at the microphone and glare at the audience, and they'd walk away without having said anything. No, it's just, everybody, I think one of the things that about musicians I've always noticed, I bet you have too, they tend to be funny. They're imaginative in the first place. And then also some of them are very good mimics and can make up good voices. And, again, when you're traveling, when you're playing over 100 dates a year and you're together, even more than that, just traveling, you got to amuse yourself. Nowadays, people are just, sometimes just, have headphones on and they're listening to music. But back then, we just listened to music all together, and we would talk and have dinner or lunch. And there was a lot of time to be together and try to amuse ourselves. So some of that got into the act. And that's good because then you're sharing yourself with the audience. Humor is incredible. And a lot of times Red Knuckles would be the only funny thing that happened at an entire bluegrass festival. If you think about it, and people telling that old Witter joke, kind of that run, or ain't it hot today? There, you can do better than that. So, and just dressing up, and then with the Trailblazers, we brought extra clothes to have guest artists. That if it was a fiddle player, it would be Elmo Otto, regardless of who was the fiddle player, and they always wear the same orange jacket and sunglasses. And so we had a whole series of different Elmo Ottos, from Eddie Stubbs to Mark O'Connor, Peter Ostrushko, and of course, the main Elmo would be Sam Bush or Darrell Anger. And that was always fun because we didn't know what would happen. And, so all kinds of shtick would come along. And when nobody else is trying to be funny, then any attempt to be funny tends to go over better. And we certainly capitalized.
I was reading an article in the New Yorker magazine about basketball and pro basketball, and how back in the day players would grow up on the playground and be tough and get knocked around, and now they're all going to these prestigious basketball academies, and they listen to headphones all the time. They're not interacting. It's a totally different upbringing. And I'm wondering if you think bluegrass is suffering a bit from that too, with a lot of young players going to college. And I mean, it's a new era. It's the phone and social media era. They're not learning on the back porch as much. They're kind of more studied. Do you think that's a good or bad
I
thing, or
don't think
just a
that's
thing?
necessary. I don't think it's, there is Berkeley College of Music has turned out some great musicians, and the culture just changes all by itself without anybody knowing how or why. But there's still family bands coming along all over the place. There's still, I mean, the fact that ETSU is training people to be good bluegrass musicians, that doesn't hurt anything. It's really whether the musicians themselves realize they're in the same business as Sammy Davis Jr. and let their personalities show. And I think the biggest thing really underlying everything is the whole concept of teamwork. Watching a team act like a team is much more individuals than an all-star. The all-star game is just not as interesting as the World Series by a long shot. The players are not as good in the World Series as the all-star game, but the all-star games, those aren't teams, those are individuals. But when you see a throw from the outfield getting somebody out at plate with a relay or a double play, that's teamwork. That's amazing to watch, and that's the reason to actually go to the ballpark instead of just watching on TV, because you see the whole throw from the outfield, and you see people backing up each other, in case the throw gets by the first baseman and stuff. And teamwork is entertaining. Teamwork is what society is built on. The pyramids were built by teamwork. Houses are built by teamwork. Bluegrass was a team. If you're not a team, you're just a bunch of individuals making a good sound together, but there's less unity to it. And especially a team that is on the road, plays 1,500 gigs together, which the first edition of Hot Rize did. Then you really have a whole feeling when you see the team walk on the stage, as opposed to, oh, there's that guy and there's that guy, And I think and a lot of bands now consist of people who are also in 3 other bands. In the really old days, if you were in the Jim and Jesse band, you didn't play with anybody else. You just didn't. If you wanted to, you could quit the band to do that. And so every band had an identity, and if you were a member, that was your band. And that was true in Hot Rize. Nobody played in other bands at all. Nowadays, that's less true, and that's a change. But there are bands like, say, Blue Highway, that's always the same people, and that's great. That's a very special group. And, the Steel Drivers have had the same people for years. And so on and so forth. So identity is part of it. Like when, Hot Rize will be getting together later this year, and just for a short bit. And it'll be neat that we're going to probably play some songs that we've started playing together over 40 years ago. That's just amazing and great, the same guys singing the harmony, 3 guys singing the harmony, me and Tim and Nick, what a great feeling that is.
I was going to mention that before, the arrangements, 4-piece band, 3 singers usually. So the arrangements are kind of sparse, melodic, and the harmony singing is beautiful. But it's funny because you sometimes can't tell who's singing what part, Nick or Tim.
Yeah.
Especially watching a video, you have to really watch their mouths to sometimes tell, which is kind of amazing that they can do that.
Well, that'll happen.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that when they started. In fact, on the first record, if you think both guys, you can't tell which one is Tim, it's because both of them are Tim. He overdubbed the harmony, and we had a little bit of singing that the rest of us were on, but almost all of the singing was 2 voices of Tim. I sang one, Country Boy Rock and Roll, with Tim, but by the second record, Nick had become a better singer, and then he got really better as time went on. I mean, again, if you do it over 100 times a year, it doesn't take that many years before it melds together, and then that's part of why brothers sound so good together, or sisters do, because they pronounce things the same way, and that's just from growing up around the dinner table. And in our case, we grew up on the road.
Yeah.
And Nick just, I don't know. Nick is an amazing musician. He picks up a lot different instruments, and he can sound like other people. Like when he does the E-Town show, he studies the music of the musical guest and what's on the records, and then he plays what's on the record. And then the musical guest who just showed up in time to do the show is kind of amazed that the band is ready to sound like their band. And that's thanks to Nick's versatility. And he's just a quick study, and he was an excellent addition to Hot Rize.
Yeah. If you could have sat down and played music with any musician in history who you didn't get to play with, who would you have a favorite that you would say, I'd love to sit down on the couch with this person and play?
Gosh, what a good question that is. I would have said Earl Scruggs, but I did get to play with him. I became a friend of his, and I just came across the cassette that I made. We were going to make an instructional video together because I urged him to do it, and he said he was willing. He eventually decided not to do it, but I have these planning tapes of me talking with him and playing together some. So, but you said somebody who I didn't play with, and I guess, I mean, I'd be on stage once in a while with Monroe, and I think it would be fascinating to just try to play with Monroe. Singing at the mic with him, which I did one time, I realized he had his own way of phrasing and timing, and being right there, a foot away from him while he's singing was a very memorable experience. Gosh, I've played with an awful lot of the musicians I would want to play with again.
Yeah.
David Grisman was a wonderful guy to play with, and Tim O'Brien. I mean, why would I want to play with somebody else? Really, I mean, and I have played with lots of other people, and I enjoy it. But Stuart Duncan, great musician. And most people don't know this, and it's sort of a funny story to tell, but Stuart Duncan, when he quit Larry Sparks when he was about 20, he called me up and said he wanted to join Hot Rize. And at the time, we were really struggling financially, and we had, we were 4-piece, and Tim could play some fiddle. We thought of Stuart as like one of the best musicians imaginable. But I said, I don't know. I don't think we could add another person now. And he was very nice. He ended up joining the Nashville Bluegrass Band, which was a wonderful thing. But when I went back and told the guys, Stuart Duncan called me up, and I said, no, they said, you told Stuart Duncan no? And I said, should I call him back? And nobody said, yeah, call him back. So I didn't call him back, and he would sit in with us. He's on the most recent record we ever made, because our 40th anniversary celebration, we invited him and Jerry Douglas and Sam Bush, and so they're all on this record with us. But sometimes 4 is better than 5. Sometimes Country Gentleman was mostly 4, and they had a very clean together sound and no fiddle, but they did all right.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I love playing with a full 5-piece sound. But just as far as who to play with, gosh, probably a mandolin player. Like when I played with just Andy Statman, the two of us made a great sound together. Just with a lot of air and a lot of energy, Yeah. Pete Rowan once told me that bluegrass is one of the many musics around the world that is made in a state of energy and simplicity. That really stuck with me. Pete is a very smart guy, and energy and simplicity was one of the secrets of Hot Rize. Don't try to play everything you know, just play it really good with good tone and lots of energy. And feeling, if you're singing a song that's sad, don't phone it in. Believe what's going on in the song when you're singing, and it'll come out more sincere,
Yeah, that's interesting. I had actually had Larry Sparks on the podcast after a long period of trying to convince him it was okay and we could actually do it on a phone, and he was very worried about all the ramifications of it, but we did it. And he was talking about when he plays guitar, or especially a solo, he said, I'm singing I'm playing the words of the song on my guitar. That's what I'm playing.
Yeah,
I'm
Earl
not trying to
Scruggs
play
does the same.
a riff. I'm trying to play the lyric.
Yeah, that's Earl Scruggs. It's fun to show banjo players examples of him going out of his way to match the phrasing of the singing in his banjo playing, which is not easy to do. And I know most people don't even notice he does that, but he talked to John Hartford about playing the words, and John conveyed that to me. And when I did this songbook, it's still the only songbook. It came out 50 years ago, but it's the only songbook. It's the only book of any kind that talks about bluegrass singing as an art. There's a zillion banjo instruction books, but one book that covers singing, and it's because I did a lot of interviews with singers about how they sang. I figured they know more than me, so let's ask them. And so Ralph Stanley, when I asked him, what are you thinking about when you sing? He's thinking, I'm thinking about what that fella in the song is going through. And I think that's what it's all about. I've coached people a lot in my educational role, and I remember this one very talented guy singing "Muddy Water," tearing up our home, or whatever, the seldom seen song.
Yeah.
And I said, "You're phoning it in. I don't think you're even imagining what it was like for these people to be losing their home." Next time he sings it, he practically makes me cry. He's singing it so good, and that's really what it's about in country music and bluegrass. Hank Williams, great voice, great phrasing. No, you just felt like he's going through this. And the Hank Williams lesson: simple lyrics, easy chords, one-syllable words all over the place. And here it is, 70 years later, 80 years later, and he's still selling more records than almost, any of. I mean, it just tells you what communicates with people. Now, a lot of musicians just want to be interesting to each other, which is fine. That's what jam sessions are for. But if you do that on stage, like the great pickers who always get together, they start a group and they play mostly instrumentals and they sing in a kind of, perfunctory way. And then they have to break up because they don't get any gigs. But you get one good singer, and then anybody playing with that singer, like Mac Wiseman figured out that he didn't need to have a band. He could play with anybody and he could carry the show. And he did it. And so you study these kinds of things if you're in it to be a professional. I'll tell you a short little thing about Fret's magazine was a big magazine in the 1980s, and they had great interviews. And they 2 issues in a row, they had big interviews with the Kingston Trio. And when I was coming up, the Kingston Trio was just a bunch of fakers as far as I was concerned. They weren't, they were just California guys who were just faking folk music. But back then, I would meet people who said the Kingston Trio came to our college, and everybody talked about that concert for the whole rest of the time they were at the college. So I read this article in Fret's magazine. Now I'm not looking at them as fakers. I'm looking at them as successful professional musicians. What was the secret? And they had a secret. They called it the X Factor. And the X Factor was anything goes, let's make this a party. So back then, the word hell was, you couldn't say it. So they would make up they'd have these songs, and it would look like they would say, and blew it all to, and then they'd suddenly sing something else, and that was a joke. And then maybe somebody from the audience calls out something, and then they'd start interacting with the audience. And after a while, the whole audience is on their side. And, it wasn't about they had good material, of course, and they sang good and they played good, but they created an experience. And of course, the Grateful Dead started in 1964 with bluegrass guys part of that, especially Jerry. Yep. And they kind of learned how to interact or to create something that the audience felt part of. as opposed to look at me, I'm good. Aren't I good? Here, I'll play something really hard. Isn't that great? It's really hard. Isn't that great? Yes, it's great. What time is it? I think I'd like to go golfing now. you know, so there are what I call acrobats out there who are doing impossible things and getting plenty of appreciation. But somebody who makes you feel something is doing more.
Yeah, I think that's my point I was trying to make about some of the younger musicians, and maybe not just younger ones, but that they're more playing for each other than for the crowd. They would even
Yeah.
turn their back on the crowd and play sometimes, which I remember seeing Bill Frisell once in concert at a little jazz club here, and all these guitarists came to see Bill Frisell, and he sat in a chair with his back to the audience the whole concert, and none of them could see what he was playing, and that's the only reason they came, to watch his fingers. It was so crazy and frustrating, and that was just him. But I mean,
Well, Miles Davis, he was a let's face the back of the stage kind of guy too.
right.
And that's mystique. Sometimes mystique covers everything, like, wow, he actually came out. He actually showed up, George Jones, hey, he showed up, mystique sells, why do people read about the Kardashians? What did they do? Bill Monroe just was a trip, you just wanted to see what he did, because he was such a weird person. And he was also an entertainer. He knew how to entertain, even though he was pretty solemn most of the time off stage and scary, really. But on stage, he really knew how to. He danced on stage. How many of today's musicians would start dancing on stage? But Bill Monroe came along when vaudeville was happening, and there was some of everything in vaudeville, or the Ed Sullivan Show. There was, keep them guessing. John Hartford understood that. He said, as far as he was concerned, you got to throw something new at them all the time. Keep throwing new stuff at them. And he'd get people singing along, and he'd get people to be involved. And John was a master entertainer. David Bromberg, an old friend of mine, same thing. He learned his father's a psychiatrist, And so David really knew how to control an audience, and that's it. You're in the entertainment business. And of course it's great to be a musician, and a person can be a great musician without being an entertainer, but they shouldn't expect to make much of a living at it unless they're a studio musician.
So we're over an hour now. I think we're winding down. Is there anything else you'd like to say that you can throw out there?
Yeah, I would like to make a short thank you for the opportunity, Chris. I love bluegrass. I'm not of the bluegrass culture, but I got so attracted to it because it's the best community I can imagine. With all the differences we have politically and religiously, we care so much about the music and the whole teamwork factor and the history of the music and the meaning of the music and the lyrics and the teamwork and the harmony singing. And then when we get together at festivals, like, we feel like it's a family, even if you don't know the people. And what I'm doing now with my life, besides continuing to do some performing, and my wife and I still like to perform as a duet, and that's great. But I really believe that people getting together to play music and be in a musical environment, like at festivals, is one of the most mentally healthy things, beneficial things to human beings, of anything I can think of. Going into a sports game and screaming your lungs out at the referee, that's some togetherness too. But in bluegrass, there's no losers. At a sports game, half the people lose. Nobody loses in bluegrass. It doesn't cost that much money to be involved in bluegrass. We don't have $5,000 ticket prices in bluegrass. We are immune from the corporate thing because we don't make enough money for them to be interested. That's fine. As long as the musicians can make enough to buy houses and live a secure lifestyle, that's enough. Nobody needs to be covered with jewels or whatever. Although Molly Tuttle's starting, it's great. She has this great band and they dress up, But anyway, what I'm doing with the Wernick Method is, and I'll plug it, letspick.org is the website. Just go to letspick.org. And you see we're currently offering about 80 classes all over the country, other countries. And that's an opportunity to get involved, not just as a wannabe, someday I'll be able to play with people, but you'll be able to play right away with people and get to know people and bond with them and have fun together. To me, that's a great way for me to be in my later years. That's my mission. That's my effort, is to feed bluegrass sort of from the ground up. I'm not so concerned with the top echelons, although I love them. Let's get a lot of people playing the music. It helps them appreciate it better. They'll listen to your podcast with more interest. Your podcast is feeding them. They're feeding you. It's a community. And I just think that's a sacred thing, a wonderful thing that I'm so glad to be part of.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of my last question, and you answered it beautifully, was kind of how you see your legacy in bluegrass and keeping the tradition going. And I think you just put it in a way, you couldn't put it better than you just put it. So I'm going to end it with that.
Okay.
I appreciate that. As I say, I've been hosting jams for about 15 years here, and I do teach 3 classes. And I think I kind of use your method, although I don't know it.
It's common sense is what it is.
Common sense.
That means your method and mine overlap a lot. I just have a system that based on a lot of experience so that we know ways for total beginners to have a really good jam session, even if nobody can take a solo. And, I learned a lot about teaching jamming just by doing it. Yeah. And I'd love for you to be a Wernick Method teacher. We can talk about that.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think that I love it too. I like beginners and getting them all to sing and play right off the bat, and no hiding in the back row. You're going to play and you're going to sing, and they do, and they love it, and they come back. So that I guess
we advertise that you're not required to sing because we know we'd lose people, so we don't say that. We say singing is encouraged but not required. And then I say, okay, you have to move your lips. You don't have to make sound, but you have to move your lips. Otherwise, you're just playing the chords and watching. No, you have to know what the song is about. So learn the chorus, move your lips. And then they end up singing one way or the other, and we don't push them into it. But that's part of it, Actually, people are surprised to hear that they can sing at all. A lot of times somebody shut them down when they were in the 4th grade, and we unshut them down and say, we're going to get you, you'll sing in tune, don't worry, we'll make sure you do, and we do. So when you play bluegrass, a lot of you is, not just your hands and your mind, but your heart is energized, and that's one of the beauties of bluegrass. It's really special that way. And the fact that it's only uses 3 chords most of the time means it's for everybody. The first rung of the ladder is right off just a little bit off the ground. That's another one of my sayings, So, So Chris, you and I, we'll talk about if you'd like to be part of our system, and we can get you more students, that kind of stuff. So. Yep. Letspick.org, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, well, I want to thank Pete Wernick. You're a wealth of good advice and information, and I've always loved your music, and appreciate what you're doing for all of bluegrass. So thanks again for being on the show, and best of luck.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Okay.
I hope you enjoyed our podcast, and thanks for listening. Visit our website, guitartownct.com, for concert and podcast schedules, or just to send us a message. We'd love to hear from you.